Have you ever wanted to learn how to free motion push quilt on your sewing machine? Well, if you do, stick around, you're in the right place because I'm going to show you how to get started. Welcome to Free Motion Basics Push Quilting a Meander Design. Hi, I'm Angelique, and today I'm going to show you how to get into doing push quilting on your home machine. I'm also going to show you how you can use the Hummingbird Hoop accessory to make it even more comfortable. So let's get started. Let's start out with what is push quilting. Here at Grace, we think of free motion quilting as moving your machine around a frame to get a design, whereas we think of push quilting as moving the fabric around a machine that's stationary. Since you'll be controlling the fabric instead of the machine, we're going to start with how to prep your quilt sandwich, and I'm also going to go over just some friendly reminders of how to take care of your machine before getting started, and a few tips and tricks. One of the most important steps when you decide to push quilt is how you prepare this quilt sandwich. Number one is basting. You need to baste really well. You don't want those layers to shift around on you when you're pushing them through. You do have a couple choices for basting. There's sew basting. Now that is not my favorite when it comes to push quilting. If I have a smaller piece. Another thing that you can do is pin basting. You can use your straight pins if you'd like, or you can use basting pins. These are like safety pins, but they have just a slight bend in them, makes it a little bit easier to get them into the fabric. Another thing that's really important before you get to that basting step is to make sure all your seams are pressed really nice and flat. You may also want to consider using starch in your fabrics, as this is going to make them a little bit more crisp, and that would include your backing fabric as well. And that is just going to help not only just keep everything neater because it is stiffer, the needle's just going to puncture a little bit better. Now, I didn't do that with this quilt at all because I chose my favorite method, and that's spray basting, because this allows me to really, each layer at a time, get this adhered together. And it will wash out when it's time to wash out the quilt, and it's just going to really help me. I spray basted it, I flipped it over, I spread things out again and spray basted some more, and I just kept going through that process over and over again until I really got all the layers nice and flat. And that's the nice thing about spray basting, is that it does stay tacky enough for you for a while to kind of peel back and re-smooth and so on. So this is ready to go. So let's talk about the next thing that's really important. It's time to prep our machine. And this is just basic maintenance that you need before you get started. Number one, clean and oil your machine per your manufacturer's instructions. We need to drop our feed dogs, or in the case of the little Rebel, we're just gonna pop our quilting plate on top of the feed dogs. We also wanna make sure that we pick a hopping foot that is appropriate for our machine. In this case, because I am push quilting with my machine sitting at your typical sewing angle, I have chosen to use the open toe foot just to make it a little bit easier for you to see. You're also going to want to, and I cannot emphasize this enough, you want to start with a new needle. That is just going to help your tension look better. It's going to help it pierce through nice and easy. It's going to keep your thread from getting shredded. You're already doing a lot of physical work on this quilt. You might as well make it as easy as possible. And then before you actually get started with the sewing, you want to be sure to have a test piece of fabric to play with and get that tension nice and adjusted for the length of the stitches that you want for your meander. I did learn a new technique recently. Instead of doing like swirls and stuff, I learned that if you do these more like pointed areas, you'll be able to make your tension better, because you'll see if you got any issues in the corners here. And I also learned that it's better to have, in the case I have this light and dark thread, I'm always going to be able to just see one of those colors of thread. I want that thread, if I can just barely see it, on the top, because when this finally gets kind of released and washed and all that, that top thread is going to pull itself into the center, whereas if I have that railroading on the back, it's not going to pull up. It always pulls down. So I got it just how I want it for this, and as I'm starting kind of the very beginnings of my actual quilt, if I need to do some slight adjustments, I can do that. Another thing that you need to consider that you might not always think about is your sewing area. One of the things that you want to do is get yourself an extension table and put that on your machine so you have plenty of space for the quilting. This is not only going to give you extra space, it's also going to help with some of that weight. The other thing you want to do is declutter, because these are things that can easily get knocked off when you're pushing this quilt around, or even get your quilt caught on there and cause you to kind of mess up your design. So let's get this cleaned up and we're almost ready to start stitching. Another thing that I recommend that you consider is getting an additional table if you don't already have an L-shaped sewing table, because this is going to help hold some more of that weight so you can really just focus on one area. The hardest part to me about push quilting is managing the weight so that I can focus on the design. As a reminder, a meander is randomly moving to create a quilting design. And there's a couple different ways to meander. What we have here is the traditional stippling, or what I like to call the puzzle piece meander. But just like we've kind of covered in previous episodes, I always think it is a really good idea to practice your design before you get started. Now, normally what we do when we're doing some kind of free motion design is we always recommend that you draw it. But push quilting is a different muscle memory. You will be able to find a free downloadable in the description below this video, and I'm going to have you print out the 2 pages. You're going to cut on the line, tape them together, and then tape them down on a nice surface. And then the next thing you're going to need is some kind of a clear piece of plastic. You can see I used to be a teacher, so I have a bunch of these. They are designed for whiteboard markers, but they're clear. There's all kinds of like clear papers that you can kind of print on. You just need something like that. You want it to be pretty sturdy. So this is kind of a thicker, sturdier one. And what I've done on this one is I have drawn a dot, and this little center part is going to be the representation of my needle. Remember that my machine is staying steady, but my quilt is what is moving. So I'm going to start by lining this up at the open circle, and I want to get comfortable with the placement of my hands. So I find that I'm generally pretty close to the area where the needle's going to be, and I'm going to move this tracing the pattern. I'm just going to try to keep it on the line. Now, when you are push quilting, you're moving these layers of fabric, and so sometimes you're having to kind of twist that fabric around. So get comfortable with the idea of like keeping it in a place and repositioning your hands as you need to. And you want to do this a few times until you feel really confident about the pattern, because once you get to the actual push quilting, you're now going to have to battle with the weight of your quilt plus the layers, and that's going to be enough of its own challenge. So this is a way for you to get comfortable with the placement of your hands, knowing when to stop in a pattern and readjust that quilt to continue on. It's not necessarily about being perfect as it is about getting the feeling and the flow of it. Well, that's enough practice, so let's move on to the next step. Now that we've finished practicing our design, it's time to try it on our quilt. So we're going to start by bringing up our bobbin. And I'm going to go ahead and drop my needle, and I want to find a good position for my hands and my quilt. Now, something else that you might find useful is to be able to have a good grip. So you can invest in some quilting gloves. You just want something that has a nice grip to it. These are actually just work gloves, and you want well-fitting ones that you have control of your fingers. That is a must for me because I have small hands. The other thing about these is they are cut resistant. Keep your hands close to where you want to quilt. Set your speed or use the regulator. Let's go ahead and start. And I like to take a few stitches so that I can get my thread here fastened off. And we're going to start our meander. Be sure not to be staring at your needle. You want to be sure that you are looking ahead of where you're sewing so that you know where you want your fabric to go. So I'm feeling kind of the need to give this a little bit of a twist for the next direction I want to go. So I'm going to want to lift my foot so I can adjust where it is. I leave my needle down, and I'm going to go ahead and smooth everything out and continue. Be sure to also check your tension regularly. Make sure you're getting the tension that you want. And again, be sure that you're keeping free of lumps as you progress on your quilt. Now, I find that push quilting like this can be a bit of a strain, especially on my neck and my shoulders, but I also love the convenience of not having a big old setup to have to take with me. So I'm going to show you how you can use the Hummingbird Hoop to get the best of both worlds. We're going to start by cleaning off our space so we can set up our machine for using the Hummingbird Hoop accessory. You're going to want to take off your base here, clean off your workspace, including removing your machine. We're going to roll out our Hummingbird mat. We're going to place our machine center on the mat. We're going to take off all the clamps, twist and remove the take-up bar, and place it around the machine. Return that take-up rail, and then I like to just check to make sure that I have plenty of room on my table where I'm not going to run off the edge or run off the mat. Now I'm ready to load my quilt. And I'm going to go ahead and get this lined up where I plan to start. I can still adjust my hoop, and we'll start by putting our first clamp on. Roll up our excess here that's in the back. Use the bungees to secure our excess fabric. Just going to place this side clamp on so I don't lose it, but I don't really have enough fabric over here since of where I'm starting. Now, just like our hoop style frames, I am doing zone quilting with this. I need to roll up my excess that's on the front. There's going to be elastics for me to hold that roll. And I don't want this dragging on the table, so I'm going to do the same thing with the excess that's here on the side. And I'm ready to get back to quilting. So now, instead of having the weight and pushing it and having to have an extra table, all I really need to do is use the Hummingbird Hoop, and it's managing that fabric for me, and then I'm going to move it. My machine's still stationary, so I'm still getting that movement, but I can do it in a place that's more comfortable for me. But it's going to help me keep the position of my shoulders lower so I can quilt longer. But just like before, we're going to bring up our bobbin thread, and we'll get right back to it. Right, so I'm reaching kind of the end of where I want to use this color, so I'm going to go ahead and rezone my fabric to the next location. So it's just the reverse of the process that we did, and then back the way we did it before. Right, it's as simple as that. As I mentioned before, you can find the practice sheets that I used earlier in the description below this video. We would also love to see your free motion push quilting designs, so feel free to share your work in the comments and give us a thumbs up if you found this helpful or inspiring. Remember to subscribe and click that bell so you never miss an episode. You can also check out our other free motion basics series right here on YouTube. And until next time, I'm going to get back to it. Bye.